Thanks, folks, for kind of the next sessions for the day. I'm here with Lars, Highland, Jerome, Devon, representing Totara, and Jerome with the USDA, and they'll be chatting about best practices for successful learning management in government agencies. We're very excited to have them. And then, just a reminder before I turn it over, we have the chat function as always. There's going to be points throughout the presentation where Lars or Jerome will ask for any questions or anything clarifying comments. Please feel free to engage with us via the chat as well as the polls. And of course, a shout out to you, Lars and team, for making this session possible. Thank you to the Totara team and the rest of your crew. We appreciate your partnership. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Lars, if you want to start sharing your screen there. I'll make sure it's
I certainly shall. There we go.
Perfect.
Are we all good?
All right, friends, I will go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us on this session. Jerome and I will be hopefully covering a range of topics, some challenges, and also the story that Jerome has at the USDA. Plus also looking at how learning technology itself is evolving and becoming more adaptable and flexible to meet, I think, what are increasing challenges ahead. So essentially, just want to introduce Jerome. Hi, Jerome. If you want to say hi.
Lars. Hi.
Hi, and to the audience. That's great. So we'll be, first off, I think, let's just go straight into some of the challenges, which I think probably will be resonant with the audience who will be probably having experienced this, especially over the past 12 to 18 months, which has been quite tumultuous, isn't it, in terms of the level of change that we've all experienced. So what we've done at Totara is done some elements of research around what could be key talent challenges facing US government agencies, and we've picked out 4, and please do in the chat indicate if any of these resonate in particular. We'll start with one obvious one, which I think has become very top of mind for us all. In fact, I attended one of the sessions yesterday, which was all about how do we keep remote workers engaged, both now, how do we cope with the transition, and how are we going to, I guess, shift to a new normal or a new hybrid way of working. And so there's some very good insights shared at that session. But just to pick out a few things we found, Deloitte HCM trend report, they identified that remote working network capabilities grew by 400% for the US Army alone. And so this happened just over the past period, and that we're seeing an acceleration of how public sector organizations in particular are adapting to a more digitally serviced environment. It has big implications if that infrastructure is challenged. And in fact, Jerome, you'll talk to that, I think, specifically with the USDA. Now, 82% of US government executives expect to keep working remotely into the future, according to Deloitte. I wonder if that's your own experience. And half of whom say they want to remote work 4 to 5 days a week even. So there's a real appetite for working differently, not in traditional office environments necessarily. Now, of course, that doesn't affect everyone. We have frontline workers, people who are not in offices. It's really impacted many of those job roles in particular. But realizing the benefits of remote working is something that I expect us to see needing to do collectively. And we shouldn't forget, as was discussed yesterday in the other session, around the impacts on employee engagement levels. It's been really tough. It's been really tough for many people, for most of us really, not just in terms of the immediate COVID impacts that we've had, but also grappling with the technology that we're being asked to use to try and stay working, the environment at home, In fact, just before we were talking about the impact of dogs barking, weren't we, Jerome? Before, so it can be challenging to sort of stay focused and work well. Also, feeling disconnected from colleagues, that can be a real challenge. That sense of camaraderie can be lost if we don't connect with others effectively. But we can do that with technology if we can learn the skills. But equally, working face to face is important. Now, another key challenge as we look forward is about attracting and retaining new talent. When we did some research, Politico indicate that just 17% of federal workers are now under 35, compares to 40% of private sector workers. So there's a challenge here in terms of hiring new staff that are younger, that will be coming in to sort of replenish the workforce in the future. And there's a real, I guess, fight for accessing existing talent that has the right types of skills. So how do you go about attracting and retaining millennial and Gen Z workers? How do you plug those staff shortages with new workers? That's a real key challenge, I think, ahead. So when we also look at this, I think we can see that there's some underlying changes to expectations as well. So younger people coming into the workforce are coming with different types of expectation. So it's less about real focus on the one job. It's very often that young people will have sort of side gigs and things, which obviously seems to be quite possible and flexible in a corporate sense, perhaps. I wonder, Jerome, if that's a factor in the public sector as much. It is
too. Yeah, it is a factor as well, right? Because when we get millennials or the younger generations to come in, it's the exact same thing as the private sector too. They are looking at different priorities from what we've seen in the past. So I think it's real relevant in both sides, indeed.
Indeed. And so there's expectations around, what's my work-life balance? How does my work blend with my work? There's lots of different angles on that, and people exploring how to balance that better. Plus, also the demands that they have in terms of financing those lifestyles and things. But at work, there is definitely a focus on trying to build strengths, to look around the team and look at peers and managers, and to facilitate a more coach mentoring experience. There's more of a keenness to see that in place. Plus also a focus on being able to build your skills much more consistently and regularly with continuous feedback throughout. So and all of that aligned with a strong sense of purpose, both individual and with the organization that you're operating with or working with. Where there's a disconnect, there's some real challenges in terms of motivation that can result there. The reskilling of existing talent, if at the end of the day we're going to find it challenging to bring new people coming into the workforce, now that's still something we have to actively do, but reskilling our existing talent to be able to adopt the new skills that are coming to the fore, with the whole digital transformation that's rushing through now many sectors, including the government sector. That creates in its own right a major skills challenge and shortage. So again, Deloitte's it's a different report, Global Human Capital Trends report. They pick out two major changes, one of which is those new capabilities about thriving in a digital age with digital fluency and analytics type skills. So quite technical skills that need to be adopted or at least have awareness of to work alongside. Plus also organizational design. The very structure of organizations need to be more adaptable, flexible, more agile to support more team-based types of work. So that may have implications inside agencies as they are currently structured. Jerome, you might have a thought on that.
I do, and we've seen the same thing here. For example, at USDA, when you look the first topic when we basically didn't use a lot of the collaboration tools, and then the COVID pandemic hit, and all of a sudden everybody needed to learn Microsoft Teams to be able to do the work of the agency. And we saw within a few weeks, 40, 50,000 people using the tool that they never used before. And if you want to talk about a new skill that you need to get right away to be able to carry the mission of, of something as diverse as USDA, people did, rise up to the challenge and did it. But that was definitely something that was not part of their skill base before. And so people can be very adaptable if you have the right tools in place.
Absolutely. And we'll talk to that a little bit later, actually. So on the wider picture of skills agenda and how that's being characterized, the World Economic Forum have a report on the future of jobs, and this was published in October 2020. And that list that you see on the screen is a list of what they identify as the skills that workers need to acquire to stay relevant over the next 10 years. In fact, they came out with a startling statistic that they reckon around 1 billion people in the world need to be reskilled by 2030 for them to remain effective in the workplace. That's a dramatic statement, but it feels increasingly likely given the pace at which we're seeing technology changing. So that one skill I picked out is probably going to be one that we're all going to need to be better at. Resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility are things that we're going to all require as the years move forward. Part of that skills development is how we build a culture that supports learning more effectively in our agencies and organizations. So that's as McKinsey would call it, an intentional learning culture. Really what that's meaning is that we bring learning out from being just in case to being something that is just in time, but also very much embedded into the everyday work flow and experience that people have when they're doing their jobs. And when we're designing a learning experience, it'll impact that, won't it? It'll impact that practice that we have and that and the way we go about it. So there are 5 key steps here that hopefully resonate or are recognizable to you as those of you who are in L&D practice in particular, that if we can capture those 5 and put them at the heart of any of our learning designs, then it's going to be far more effective. So set small, clear goals, be really clear about them, ideally make sure they should all be aligned to business needs and team requirements and needs. The learning experience should be removed of distraction where possible. So put the dog outside, keep focused on the challenge or the learning task at hand. Actively seek feedback. That's often better done when working in or designing it as a group experience, so an action learning experience. And then having the opportunity to deliberately practice those skills in a real setting. So ideally, that's completely built into the learning design process, and that reflection is built into that as a regular part of the experience, because that's how we cement those new behaviors and skills into real everyday work practice. But that's easily said. There's often roadblocks, there's often issues in the way to achieving that. And what we need to do is be able to be more effective at increasing our efficiency and effectiveness. But it's a real challenge, is how do we break through some of these issues? 19% of government workers say they currently lack visibility across the organization. So that's a common cause of frustration and delay in getting things done. So improving comms, workflows, that's really key, I think, for agencies looking to increase that efficiency and be able to be more aligned around goals that everybody understands and that they're very clear about what they're doing and when and how. But to increase that efficiency, I think the choices that we make around the technology that supports it is critical. So you need to have technology that's more under your control, that you can fit your needs, that you can perhaps standardize and consolidate training by function, by geography, by agency type or objectives, for example, and that you can really challenge some of the silos that may have formed in the organization where there isn't internal communication around HR and the L&D activities themselves. So one of the things that's characterizing this, I think, is in looking at L&D teams themselves, is that shift in our own practices. So how we shift our focus from building, learning, and training to one where we're more a performance consultant, and really looking at how we're making or assisting people, coaching people to be able to be better in performing in their roles, and that learning is part of that everyday journey anyway, so rather than a discrete thing that happens separately. Now, this slide you're looking at, I won't go into detail, and by all means this is all shared afterwards, but it's worth a closer look, because it does characterize, I think, that shift between instruction and through to more coaching and performance oriented thinking. This is something that was brought up by Josh Burson on a webinar I did with him recently, but it's actually from the LPI, which is the Learning and Performance Institute capability model. It's if you were to search for that, it's well worth a closer look. There's more detail around it. So they're the 4 challenges that we've identified. Ryan, any questions that have arisen as yet for that?
Not yet, Lars, but your the one slide, the 19% of government employees indicating that they're lacking visibility across different agencies or different departments. I think that's an interesting one. How have agencies you've worked with addressed that kind of thing? I think it's something that people often run into. Any thoughts, or Jerome, actually, you being at the USDA, any advice for folks who are running into that very issue?
Yeah, and Ryan, that's actually a great question. So thank you for bringing that up. And we see that a lot. And that's, when we talk about silos, I work at agriculture, so we always think of silos, but we're trying to break down those silos. And a lot of time is when you have, let's say, your learning management system, if you don't have something that's across the entire enterprise, the entire agency, it's really hard to see visibility where you have some large agency that might have different systems for different components or different bureaus, and those systems don't necessarily talk to each other. And then it becomes very complicated to get that view of the entire enterprise where, for example, USDA back in 2004, we consolidated 17 different LMS into one. And so being able to do that, that means if anybody at the top says, hey, Jerome, I need to know who did training on this topic over the last month, I can give them the exact data, and it just takes a couple of clicks and we can get to that data. So once you're able to manage your entire training enterprise based on data, you can make better decisions as well. And that helps you give you a better visibility of what is going on across the enterprise. And also we're able to leverage, if agency A does a great job, then they can talk to agency B and C. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel as well. We can see what works well, what doesn't work well. And then what we do is we create a shared community of practice within all the different agencies where they meet every 2 weeks. And that way they are able to share a lot. And that helps you to break down that lack of visibility. But if you have a system that's broken down and doesn't talk, it's very difficult that way if you don't have that across the enterprise view.
To start with the data, provide transparency with the mapping. That's very practical and tactical advice, Jerome. Thank you so much for that. Let's see, Lars, I just want to make sure. Yes, there's one more. Someone's building out new descriptions in their learning department coming from private sector. How would rewriting capabilities and job descriptions public sector different? Be different? Is this something you can address now, or is something you want to address later on?
Probably better later on, unless Jerome, you got something to add?
I was saying, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be in common, between private sector and public sector jobs. A lot of the different capability and skills are going to be similar. What I found a lot of time is when we have people that come from non-government to government, it takes you usually 6 to 9 months just to get up to speed on how things work, within the government. And so some of these skills of adaptability and being able to learn how to do something different is very useful. I mean, I've worked in private sector, I've worked for the UN and government, and each has their own challenges, obviously, but the government wants a little different. But I think as far as when you look back at your skills that you have to have, those are going to be very similar. What I would recommend people also is to try to ask for other departments or other colleagues to see their job description so you can compare notes and see what other people have used. So, and we have typical job description for certain job series, depending. They could be an O201, it could be a 1712, it can be different job series for the training folks. And that's usually it's a great way to find what other people have done and look at the different way. And you can work with the HR folks to help you with that.
Shout out to you, Jerome. They said they're going to follow your advice. So kudos. All right, Lars, back at you.
Thank you. Well, actually, over to Jerome. So this is a great story, I think, Jerome, of how the USDA has responded to its own learning and development needs. So over to you.
Right, Lars. Thank you for moving the slides for me. Yeah, I've been with USDA since 2005, and it's always been a fun challenge to manage, 140,000 people across the entire US and all over the world. And what I've always tried to do is how do we offer the best learning experience for our folks? And we not only serve USDA, we also serve agencies outside of USDA because we are a shared service provider. So we also do other non-USDA agency as well. So whenever we design and we think about our platform, it needs to work for USDA and other agencies as well. So we have to always make it as flexible as we can be. And so what we wanted to do, we didn't want to get locked down into a lockdown system. So we looked at different companies where we could felt like we would have more control and more influence, and actually being able to have the roadmap of the product also meet our needs. So we've always had a vision of wanting people to be able to innovate and learn and having the technology match, the challenge and the mission of USDA. And so we really wanted to have a flexible, and we wanted to have a learning experience platform, not just an LMS to check the dots and make sure that everything was done. We wanted to be able to offer a real learning platform and not just a mandatory training checklist kind of environment. And we wanted to have it to be adaptable and change as the industry changes over the years. If we can go to the next one. So what we were trying to do, we wanted something that was in the cloud because that was some of the, we wanted to go with a cloud strategy, and that was something that USDA was pushing. And we have a very decentralized administration at USDA. So we have 29 sub-agencies plus 5 external agencies, and it's everybody is very different, all have different needs, even though most of them are similar, but it's very decentralized, and we had to find a way to have something that was still centrally managed, but could be managed by each of the agencies, so they will feel like they were in charge and were able to use the platform the best that they could. Of course, budget stayed flat, so we had to be making sure we were able to offer the best platform without having to and staying within what our budget was. And we were trying to find, how do we get better bang for the buck, so to speak. So we were looking at many different platforms. We did have also some, quirky government requirements, like having to do the SF-182 form, doing the individual development plan, and some of the other things that are very just typical to the federal government that you might not have as a requirement outside. We also work with LinkedIn Learning. We work with Skillsoft and Percipio, and so we needed to make sure we had those integration to work really well out of the box to be able to manage our training. We also create 100 to 300 custom courses every year internally, and we needed to have everything just work kind of seamless for the end users. I know on our side, there's always a lot of work, but as far as people of the users and the administrators, we wanted to make it as easy as possible. And we actually started looking at making it mobile friendly many, many years back. And we will always say, hey, if it works on a phone, then it's going to work on everything else. So we just wanted to look that was something that was responsive. We also looked at making sure that the platform also was accessible from a Section 508 viewpoint. That was very important. And that tended to work well between the mobile and the 508. So that's where kind of the things we're looking for. And it had to work, for 140,000 people in 200 plus countries and all different kind of bandwidth and system access and computers. And so kind of a complicated requirement, but we did get it to work. We can go to the next one. Thank you. So this is just to give you a quick screenshot or an idea what the platform looks like on a computer or a phone. We do probably about 1 million plus training event every year. And basically the platform just does it without using a beat. Even when the pandemic started back last year, we were like, okay, we'll cross our fingers, hopefully the cloud does what it's supposed to do. And it did. I remember we used to look at the curve of the logins, and unfortunately, it looked just like the COVID curve at the beginning. So it was very logarithmic thick, and the system just kept going. And so we put that on Amazon Gov Cloud as per Totara's recommendation, and it's been working really well. And within USDA, we have anything from, I always say we have anything from anthropologists to zoologists and everything in between. And so we're able to use all that different content and the partners we have to be able to do it, kind of like by the different areas. And so we're able to take care of training for our HR folks, our IT people, our grants training people, our, all the different admin and back office. And we also support 40,000 firefighters. We support people that keep our food safe, from a food safety viewpoint is very important. Keeping that. So what we call is always the food fire. The food, the fiber, and the farm. So there's a lot of things that USDA does, and we've been able to do it on this one platform, which has been really great because then we can concentrate and spend more time on having a great experience as opposed to spend time on trying to make the platform works. I'll go to the next one. So this was a very interesting insight. So we have the AgLearn platform is connected with the LinkedIn learning platform. And so we actually able to see the skills from our learners based on the interaction that our learners have on the LinkedIn learning platform. And of course, Microsoft Teams is the choice of tool for USDA to do online meetings and online collaboration. You can tell that was the top skill that people didn't have and started learning. And they had to learn really fast because the mission of USDA didn't go away as the pandemic started. If anything, it actually increased because they had to make sure that people had, from a term of looking at food and providing food and even food for the kids, in school and all that, there was a really high demand on USDA to perform. And so you look at the different skills that you have, and I thought it was really interesting to see, things like virtual collaboration and Teams came up. And what's interesting, it goes back to what we talked about earlier too with Lars. Look at things like coaching, career management, personal development, career management, time management, all those things are there too. So it's interesting to see that the skills that Lars talked to us about before, you can tell that's what people are trying to get. Communication also is a huge skill. I think that made it so that when people were not in person anymore, they were still able to carry the mission. And so that I thought that's a great graph to show what our folks have been doing on the platform. If you want to go to the next one, here we go. So looking for what we're trying to do. The way I like to always think about things is that we're on this continuous improvement journey. It just never ends. You always try to do things better. You're never satisfied, so to speak. You make a lot of great stride, a lot of great progress, but you always want to build on that. And so what we leverage, basically looking at the roadmap from Totara, being able to see what they were going to do in the future. The fact that it was very open and they always tell you about what they're going to do next, it helps you plan for it too as well, instead of wondering what's going to be next. So we want to do things, for example, having a better learner experience. So that's another big thing at USDA. We have a lot of things going on to improve employee experience. And I think the learning experience is part of that employee experience. It's one of the many things in there that we want to improve. And for that, we're actually going to leverage the Engage module for that. When you look at a lot of the George Person's work, or the working in the flow, and what they're looking at as far as the future, people are really looking for generated and curated content. They want to have content that's relevant to what they're working on and what their competence needs to be. So that's some of the things we're also looking to use that platform as well, is to be able to curate content to the need of the learners, while also leveraging all the external training content that we have from our vendors, and make sure that they are shown into the LMS and easy to find and easy to look at. And people can say, yeah, I love this class, I really like this one, so that people can also share their experiences as well. We also, in our workforce also is we feel like the going back to work is going to be different from what work was from before. So I think we're still going to see a lot of work from home, or virtual workers, or you don't have to come to the office but one day a week kind of thing. And I think that's the way, at least that's the way where USDA is going. So we also want to be able to make sure that they're learning, they don't have to go to a classroom, that they can also do it through the platform. And back also with the reskilling, if you want to reskill your staff, one of the things we're looking at as well is, what I need to know where they are at now. I need to get a good assessment of where their skills are. And so we've done a lot of 180 workforce assessment, where the learner would go in, self-assess, and then their supervisor would assess their skills. And then that way we can see if there's a skills gap also between what the job requires and what their skills are. And that can really help us too, as those position and jobs changes, to see, well, they're really great here, we're going to make that even better, and then we maybe see some gaps here. And so we can work on getting those done. And then the other thing we want to do next year also is to bring enhanced 360 assessment to help with basically the employee development plans, and for people to build a great IDP within what they want to work on throughout the year, to go through a 360 assessment instead of just getting feedback from the supervisor. Is great to also get feedback from your peers and for the people that work for you, to get the whole picture, to be able to see how you're gonna perform better based on those kind of feedback. So I think we're going to try to use as much of the platform as we can to address these challenges that we talked on earlier. So I think it's going to be a lot of good fun stuff to do in the future, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great. So that's where we are here.
That's great, Jerome. And yeah, all of us at Totara, we're very excited to see what you can do with the platform. I'm going to cover in a little while the reasoning why we've brought learning and engagement and performance together, which is what you've just been talking to. But before we do that, I think we'll just cover off what we think are 5 learning management practices, which are good things to look out for, and just some hints and tips, really, I think, as to what to effectively look at in your own agencies. So the first one is change management. It's a big challenge making any change in any organization at any point, but we need to be better at facilitating that change. And one of the key things is about balancing stakeholder communications. So, it can be that there's too much communication. That can lead to information overload, misunderstanding, or a reluctance. It builds resistance. Too little also can lead to a lack of engagement as well. People aren't sure what the change is that is being proposed. So it's really important to personalize the communication to different user groups, whether they be administrators, managers, or learners and trainers. That's one key bit of advice. Jerome, do you have anything extra to add from your own experience there?
I think change management is just one of the things that you have to do, and you have to do it well. And it's a lot easier said than done, for sure. But yeah, I think you have to striking that balance is critical. And same, I can't send 140,000 emails every day to people about the same thing. But if you can start to personalize, then it gets very interesting, right? So see, if I'm in accounting, I want to know about things that relate to me in accounting, but I don't really care about all the other stuff. And that's what it gets interesting, is if you can start targeting better. I always think like you need to have like a marketing guru to help you with those things, right? Because it's a special skill. And we actually have, on our contractor staff, we actually have one person dedicated just to communication. And I've had that position within our group for the last 12 years. And that's really the best decision I made back then, was we have actually a communication specialist on staff. And that's all he does. And that just tells you how important it is, right? It's enough you have to put resources to it.
Oh, that's great. That's a very tangible bit of advice there, I think. And the role of communications and all the different channels that are available to us is only going to grow. Being able to do that effectively is really critical. As is number 2, which is about technical engagement, and that's what we're talking about there. Is how do you get HR teams and IT teams and then external vendors to talk effectively to each other so that everyone is on the same page. That's really tricky. It's very easy to have miscommunicate or misunderstanding, or not enough, I think, transparent sharing of what those requirements might be, and actually opening up the opportunity for those requirements to evolve through collaborative discussion. So being able to have an open, trusted partnership with internal and external suppliers it avoids lots of challenges down the track. I would say so, and that would include data management, how you manage migration, integration requirements around the whole wider technical ecosystem, how to go about upgrading, availability and scalability. And then, as Jerome was already alluding to, having a dialogue about what the roadmap is for with vendors, and being able to influence that in a positive way for your own organization's sort of needs, and having a rapid response when needs change. And I think that's only going to happen more rapidly in the future. Or right now, we're already experiencing that. Jerome, any
Lars,
thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I was thinking it's very interesting, because whenever we bring external clients to do the training for them, and we usually will be in touch with, let's say, the training group that wants to get the learning management system. It's very interesting every time that whenever we do have a successful onboarding, is when I get HR and their IT people and their procurement people and our vendors and our technical all together. And that's when the magic happens. But if you don't get all these groups together, it doesn't work very smoothly. And I've always been impressed and amazed when we get all the right players within all the groups, that it works really well. And if you don't get those involved, then you get a lot of roadblocks. So it's really critical to get your HR, your IT, and your provider to be on a first name basis, so to speak, right? And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. Number 3 is performing a functionality audit. So really looking carefully at the features and functionality that are being used, or if they're not being used, are there opportunities being missed? Being able to use data analysis and reporting effectively to check on usage levels is really helpful, and being able to have easy ways of presenting that reporting through dashboards and auto reports going to the right people at the right times is really helpful at being able to really carefully configure and structure the platform itself so that the experience that it offers each of the audiences, whether they be learners or administrators or managers, is aligned really well. So you can turn off functionality if it's not needed. You can improve accessibility as well. So being able to plan and define what those value-added features or the value add that will come with new features when you're looking at the roadmap. I mean, it's good to be sort of critically assess that. There's no point just having features just for the sake of it if they're not really applicable to your own organization necessarily. So any thoughts there, Jerome, about functionality that works well or not so well?
Yeah, I always say, it's easier to add than to remove. So we always look at what are the things we wanted to have, and then we usually tend to do we do like little tests, and we work with certain groups to see if they like the new functionality instead of just turning it on. And you'd be surprised, sometimes we have some of our groups say, oh, we really need to have this. I just saw it on the Totara webinar and I want to get all that stuff turned on. And then we turn it on in our non-production environment, and they will use it, and they're like, yeah, no, we don't want that one. We don't need it. It doesn't work. Or we really like this one, and then we can implement it properly, right? So instead of just turning everything on, which would be confusing, I think, for user. And then the audit is what do you call it? Priceless. Because when I get people that tell me, hey, what did so-and-so did at 3:00 on this day because of, for whatever legal reason they need to know, and we can go click, and they have it. Or when I have, Secretary of Civil Rights that calls and say, hey, I need to know who is doing reasonable accommodation training within each of the agency and who have completed, not completed it. And you're like, yeah, okay. And then 5 minutes later, you can send them the beautiful pivot table with all the stuff they need. That's when it's doing the things that you want. Or some people say, I need to know every week, and you just go click, and then every week on that day they get the report with all the stuff they need, and you don't have to. They can self-service themselves. They can use the dashboard. Those kind of things are very, very critical, I think. And when you get 1 million completions a year, and you can just go click and get the data, it's a lot. It's very beautiful.
Very good. Thanks, Jerome. Number 4 on our list is training and support. That's a major reason for any platform, but particularly learning management systems failure to engage is because people don't know how to make good use of it. Now, that's not to say the system needs to be intuitive. It does. It needs to have a UX that's straightforward, but there are certain tasks and activities that you want people to engage with that it needs a bit of guidance, arguably, and the system itself should be able to provide that through in-product help, for example, but also in terms of the training materials that would sit around that. So being able to access that easily, and I'm talking not just less about learners really, because that's where intuitive, the system should be naturally intuitive and guide anyway. But when we're talking about administrators, and Jerome, you have a lot of administrators of across the agency, don't you? How many is it?
We have over 2,000 admins.
2,000. That's a significant number.
We can't just put them on a little Teams meeting and train them, all at once. But,
no, exactly.
But you're right. It is needed, and we do have FAQs, job aids, and all that. Those interesting things that people have to have. And it's true for the user. It's kind of feels silly that they have to get trained on how to use a training system. But then on the other hand, it's like everything else, if I can give you the tips and tricks and you can do things in 2 minutes instead of 10, that is useful. One thing we did to really target and make the UX as intuitive as possible is when we went to this new platform in 2018, so we went basically from a completely different platform to something totally new. And again, that's part of that change management we talked about, that people were like, oh my God, it's all changed. What's happened? It doesn't look the same. I'm kind of lost kind of thing. And we did every quarter, we did a survey that was open to anybody in the system. And we just asked them, the same 5 questions, and then there was an open-ended at the end where they could put whatever comments they had. And we had a few that were like, hey, I want the old one back. And well, that's sorry, it's not going to happen. But there was also a lot of very good feedback on, hey, I don't understand why I can't do this. I wish he has that, And so we were able to look through all the comments, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of comments, and kind of sort through out and see which one actually made sense. And we were able to make changes. I mean, silly changes like having a big button in the middle that says mandatory training that people can click on, and then they have the list of all the stuff they have to do. You'd be surprised how much people love that, because they're like, you know what, I can go and click and I'm done. But we didn't have that at first. Silly things like that. And when we looked at it every quarter, a lot of the I want the old system back went away, which was great. And then there were a lot more, good questions. And then it just became kind of like more of the regular kind of feedback that we would expect. But just asking that open feedback and actually do something about it. We've had actually people say, hey, I like all the changes you've made and it's better. So when you see those kind of feedback on the report, well, actually, we're doing a good job. But you can't you have to be proactive, right? You have to think about those things in advance and always try to make it better. And if you're reactive, I think your end users might not be so happy about it. So having that constant feedback loop for us was very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. We won't dwell on this particular slide, but there's a useful checklist here of questions that you can ask yourself in terms of preparing the training and rollout support really for a new system that's going into your agency. There's a whole load of detail in that. In fact, I think we have a guide which we may be able to point you at separately back on our page that takes you through that in more detail. So do get in touch with that. Number 5 is not a surprise really, integrating the system into the wider ecosystem of tools and technology that you will have across the agency is really critical. And if it's too much of a black box and not easy to get access to, then it can create big challenges. So open, flexible platforms are much easier to integrate and adapt to a technology ecosystem that's probably changing quite dramatically in other areas. So as your agency starts to adopt more digital first strategies in terms of its actual services, then there's more systems that potentially the learning ecosystem, not just the learning, but the engagement and the performance aspects could actually plug into in useful ways. So it's certainly something to look carefully at, is the API, the plugin architecture that's available, and also the option of having genuine custom integration, because that can add significant organizational value. Jerome, have you got some thoughts on that integration challenge for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, it actually wasn't a challenge because all our integration actually worked. So it's good. But yeah, things like single sign-on, so you don't have to remember another username and password. You go to work, you go to your machine, you click, and you're in there, and you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things you want. Make it easy for people to go in so they don't have an excuse for not doing it. Make it so they can do it on their phones, they can do it on their tablets, they can do it on their government computer, they can do it on their home computer. So we were trying to break down all this, I can't get to it, so I can provide training. Having our LinkedIn Learning and Skillsoft and Percipio and all this technology integrated is great. So we always have the latest and greatest course content. Plugins are cool too, because, for example, our folks love to have certificates of completion. And there's a great little plugin that you can use that just makes a little activity, and now you can create all the certificates you want. But just the fact that it was just like click, make it available, those things are great. We had another, and let's say that was using question mark. We got it to be able to work directly with the LMS. We're going to try it actually integrating with Teams, which if we get that to work with our version of Teams, will be super, super cool. So I think, it's important to make sure that whatever platform you use can play nicely with the rest of your ecosystem is critical.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks, Jerome. we were going to stop for questions, but Ryan, I think we might need to crack on. Do you think?
Well, we've got about 11 minutes, Lars and Jerome. There are a few questions here. You guys really sparked the interest of this group.
Oh, good.
Lars, if you want to go through a couple of next points, and let's try to save, if we can, like 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have time for those questions for sure. Let me just move on and just give the reasoning why that flexibility, that adaptability matters more and more. So we already looked at this skills challenge, and that's really what's, I think, we're all facing. And we're also looking at how organizations themselves are starting to shift in the way that they're organized and structured. And I touched on that a little earlier, but this slide here is an interesting one. It actually came from Red Hat, who are proponents of open everything in terms of technology, really. But they applied that thinking on themselves as an organization almost, and characterized it as an open organization. But you'll see this sort of model in lots of different places in terms of how businesses or organizations are changing. So moving from top down directive to a bottom up, more collaborative and genuinely more responsive structure, which is more suited to an environment or work, an environment which is subject to rapid change and uncertain shifts. Otherwise, in the older structures, we've seen it in the past 12 months. Some organizations have been brittle, they've broken, they're no longer here. Others are brittle and broken and just not delivered the services that they needed to do as expected. So there are big challenges there. But if you can shift to a more flexible working environment, almost like thinking about we're all people organized in an organization and connected to each other, but we sort of need to move in tandem. So I don't know if you're aware of murmurations. Murmurations are animals like birds, fish as well, that move in tandem and in concert together, and but they're inherently flexible as a result. So it's quite an interesting visual image to hold in mind about how adaptability is increasingly essential. Another way of thinking about it is musically. I've got a bit of a musical background. I started on the classical side and then got more and more into jazz, Dixieland jazz, played that a lot. And it's interesting how the differences come through. So, rather than being conducted to a fairly prescriptive score in a classical sense, in a jazz sense, you're playing off each other, and there's some flexibility as to adapt to what others are doing around you. So that's an interesting way of thinking about how we might work together in teams, the people around us. How do we retain and sort of behave more flexibly in that way? All of this is in we're really here to try and, I think, arrive at this place, this friendly workplace, an adaptable workplace where each of the steps in this sort of virtuous circle are actively happening. So, we do feel that we're part of a cohesive team that works together. We do have access to the right resources, learning and performance resources that we need to get our job done. We get feedback, we get constructive feedback, we get praised and recognized where that's appropriate, and that we have the opportunity to be upskilled on the desired topics, and not just upskilled, but develop into new roles and new opportunities and new skills that we know are coming down the track. So I appreciate that probably, in all of our workplaces, this is looks a bit like in a utopia, but it's certainly one that we need to strive towards if we want to keep our workforces, our talent together and growing with us in organizations. And that's something that we've done at Totara to really focus what our platform does in terms of learning, in terms of performance management and engagement and collaboration, and really design it to address the underlying motivators that affect us in the workplace. Now, I reckon a good number of you will be aware of a book that was written 10 years ago, maybe 11 now, by Daniel Pink. He popularized the idea of motivation, what really drives us. He called it drive. And he picked out three things that the research, underlying research was showing it, and called it mastery. So the ability to acquire skills and then constantly improve those skills, having the space, the autonomy, and the psychological safety to operate and exercise those skills with others, and to challenge what may be the status quo around you without fear. And then being also to align yourself around a common purpose. So the company or the organization having a clear purpose that is understood and also aligns with individual values. If you get all of those three things right, you end up with a highly motivated and high-performing individual, high-performing teams, and then ultimately a high-performing organization. Having the right levers and the right alignment between those is a challenge, and too often all the requisite systems and workflows are too separated. So what we've done is build them together into a common platform, which is why we've got the talent and experience platform as we call it. So, we've got plenty of information that you can have a look at that separately after this session. But and I'd encourage you to take a close look and also to reach out to myself and Jerome. So that's everything. Those questions, Ryan, that would be great to hear what they are.
You're quite popular. A lot of activity in the chat. Lars, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and unshare your screen so they can see you guys as you're chatting.
Yeah, sure.
Question for Jerome. Can you provide some examples of how you went beyond the restrictions of the commercial platform? This was a little bit earlier in the presentation, I think, when you were starting, but just a little bit of context and some advice in that sense.
Yeah, so what we did, we were looking for really towards the open source and looking at platforms that were open. And at the same time, we needed a platform that could still meet all our needs. And so we went from a list this long to a list that was this long, and then there was like two, and then there was one. But we just didn't want to get into the big closed kind of systems. And so that's what we went for. We on purpose look for open source platform because usually open source companies will tend to have that more open model for their software and the way they deliver their products. So this is why we went that route.
And there was a question about what tools were used for oh gosh, where is it now? Lost it. The assessments. The 180 assessments.
So for the 180 assessment, we actually used a built-in tool from the platform, which we basically worked very closely with our stakeholders to make it do exactly what they wanted. So we worked between basically my agencies, the Totara learning team, and ourselves. We put working groups together, made all the requirements, and we actually used the actual platform to deliver that as opposed to go to an outside platform, meaning I was not getting more budget to do it. So we did with the tool, and it actually does what the folks want to. So it was kind of a win-win for us.
You work with what you have, man.
Yes, but it worked well too, and the customer in the end was happy. So that's what mattered.
This is potentially for both of you. Lars, there was a chart earlier, I think it was number 3 and number 5. What specific tools or processes were used for feedback and reflection? Do you know which chart I'm talking about?
Feedback and reflection. Which tools were used for feedback and reflection? Well, again, from Totara's perspective, our Perform module and part of the platform offers continuous feedback and check-ins. So you can organize those conversations, and then you can capture the key salient points that need to be captured to inform future conversations. So it's done in that way, but also in terms of feedback, short, sharp pulse surveys and things like that, short, sharp sentiment tests and things, you can use our Engage tool. Also has that facility in place, so you can capture right across an entire audience quickly what they feel about a subject.
You guys have impeccable timing. We're right on time here at the end. But I wanted to make sure, Lars, we gave opportunity for you to obviously plug the Totara and the resources available on the sponsor page. So make sure you all, when you click the files, it takes you to the Totara page. And then, yeah, if you want to advance your screen there, Lars, too. Yeah, I'll let you chat about this, guy.
Yeah, just if you do go to the page, you'll see an ebook which covers in more detail those 4 challenges that we talked about in the session. So either follow that direct link that you see on the screen now, or we'll just go through to our page and you'll find that and plenty more besides. And also, if you'd like to meet others, we have a very vibrant Totara community. It also has a government a special interest group that sits in there as well. I'd invite you in. It's a free community, totara.community. That's the URL. You can come in and you'll get a taste of what Totara feels like as well. It uses the platform itself for product training and other things as well, best practice as well. So please do come on in. There's some interesting people in there, I think, who can help you out.
Community drives innovation, and so you guys are at the forefront of it, Lars. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Lars, to you and your team for making this possible, for sharing the information. Jerome, we all learned a lot. There are a lot of challenges when putting like this together, so we tip our hats to you for making it work and finding a good partner in Lars and the rest of that crew. So thank you to you both for providing this awesome information. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
All the best, guys. Cheers.
Bye-bye.